Hello Frizzle friends! I'm excited today to talk to you about the books I've recently read, and we are going to be giving them some awards. Here's some of the illustrious awards that a book can receive today. And let's kick this off with the worst book I read because of the hype. So this is a very specific subsection of books that I pick up because I hear positive reviews about them and I'm hoping I'm gonna like them too. So the one that wins this award is The Only One Left. One of the things that I can really pat myself on the back for this is I avoided spoilery reviews for this, which is quite difficult because it was everywhere. Everyone was reviewing it. And now I will join the masses of people who have read and reviewed this book to say that it was okay, but disappointing. This book follows a woman who works as a live-in caretaker, where the elderly woman that she's taking care of when she was a teenager maybe murdered her entire family, and has since then been a hermit in this crumbling mansion on the cliffs. This maybe murderess starts telling her story to our heroine. So in this book, we both get the past storyline of what led up to the family getting murdered and how our elderly woman was involved in this, and also the present timeline as our heroine tries to unravel what is going on in the mansion now, because there are some spooky disappearances and maybe murders also happening present day. If you're looking for a thriller that's going to give you a lot of plot twists, this one is good for that. If you're looking for something more than that, it's not going to give you much more. My favorite part of it is the setting of this crumbling manor house that's up on a cliff, and like every few chapters, more of it is literally crumbling into the ocean, like building and building until the climax of the book, when like everything is ready to just completely collapse, and those vibes, immaculate. No notes. It was over the top and very entertaining. I think my least favorite part of this book was that I just didn't really care about any of the characters. A lot of them are pretty despicable, and even the ones that aren't despicable felt kind of flat. Like our heroine, she's just like a caretaker, and she's like, ugh, my life is so boring. All I do is take care of old people. But like, is she on a journey of self-discovery, or is that going to change in this book? Not really, unless you count like, I don't know, trying to solve murders. Anyway, The Only One Left was the worst book that I read because of the hype, and I gave it 3 stars. Moving on to a happier category, the best book that I read because of the hype. And this gets to go to The Dead Romantics. This is another one that went viral on the interwebs, so I was picking this up based on like the premise alone, which is our heroine is a writer, but she's been really struggling with believing in love and being able to finish this romance novel that she has a deadline for like right now. And her editor is being kind of a stickler for this deadline, and she's really stressed out about it when her father dies. So she goes home for the funeral, and what does she meet there but a ghost haunting her, because she could see ghosts, by the way, and it is the ghost of her also recently deceased editor. And then this turns into a romance. I did love the romance between our heroine and her ghost boyfriend. But what's more, this book felt like it had such larger depth to it, where it was also tackling our protagonist's grief over the loss of her father, her strained family dynamics as she's going home and talking to people for the first time in years. I love that this novel had the perky and silly elements of a rom-com, while also the deeper elements of more a general fiction book. It balanced wacky ghost hijinks and our heroine coming to learn how to love again and care deeply and reconnect with her family, and actual romance superbly well. I had a lot of fun with this one. I gave The Dead Romantics 4 stars. You might notice I am reading an unusually large amount of both thrillers and romances this month, and that's because I had a project where I was reading only thrillers and romances because I was feeling burnt out on fantasy and books. So if you want to catch more detailed reviews and reactions to these books, I will link that video in the footnotes for you. Moving on to the award of most disappointing gets to go to Hana Carries On, because I had such high hopes for this book. I was on a romance kick. I was enjoying them. And then I hit this one. This is a rom-com that takes place in modern-day Canada, and our protagonist Hana loves radio, and she dreams of becoming a radio host and having her own show, and she has her own podcast. But she's also dealing with some stress at home, as her family runs a restaurant that is not doing so well, especially as a new restaurant is coming to the block, which is also cornering the halal food market. One of Hana's best friends is this guy she met through her podcast. He's a big fan of her podcast, and now they text all the time. And one of her biggest rivals and irritants right now is that upstart guy creating the new rival restaurant. So it's a rom-com. You can guess where that goes. I was really looking forward to this one. I was looking forward, I think, one, the focus being on Hana and her dreams and goals, because that's really what the blurb made it sound like, and this book did. And I was also looking forward to this exploration of a culture that isn't my own, of a second-generation Muslim immigrant family in Canada. And honestly, the book did deliver all that. It did. However, it disappointed me in other ways that really drove me crazy and made it so I didn't even end up finishing this book, which is it's so cheesy. Like, if we compare this to Dead Romantics, the balance over there of like cheesiness and serious story was in a good ratio. The balance in 𝐂𝐇𝐀𝐏𝐿e, the cheesiness is like through the roof, and it was too much for me. If you are looking for a cheesy rom-com, this could be your thing. It was not my thing. I think one of my least favorite tropes is where like you have a couple that's like kissing and then the rival love interest walks by as they're kissing and sees them, and then it's a big thing and just kind of all this manufactured drama just because they happen to be walking by at the exact wrong moment. Yeah, that happens in this book, but like even more so with a fake marriage proposal. I knew when I hit that point, I was like, this is too much cheese. Her business rival guy, also secretly being her texting pen pal guy, was also done too cheesily for me. I gave 𝐂𝐇𝐀𝐏𝐿e 2 stars. Next, we have the award of most surprising in a good way, and this gets to go to His and Hers. His and Hers is a thriller with 2 narrators. We have her, a reporter who's a little bit down on her luck, but trying to catch her big break again with reporting on some mysterious murders. And then we have him, a police detective working on that murder case. And this book does all of the little surprises so well. It was stringing me along every other chapter. This is one of those books where it gives you so many clues, where it feels like every chapter you're getting new details and that they're all important and you have to hoard them and try to piece them together by yourself. And then this is also one of those books that tricks you. So many of these clues are red herrings. I also love how this book has so many layers of relationships because our 2 narrators also have a history together, and it's not a pretty one. And they also both have a history with the murder victim that isn't pretty. This book was full of surprises that kept me incredibly engaged and really enjoying the plot of this book. Now, I gotta say, this book isn't perfect. I think it really didn't live up to its potential with all of these juicy relationships it's setting up. Everyone in this book seems to be interrelated to each other in different ways with dark pasts. And I was really hoping all of that would really come to the forefront and really be super important to both the mystery plot and, even more importantly for me, their character development and how their interactions grow. But not really. Like, you could take out the part that our 2 leads knew each other before, and it wouldn't really change the plot of this book at all. Additionally, this book didn't live up to its potential in the detectiveness of it. Like, both of our narrators are investigators assigned to this case, and I was kind of disappointed at the lack of investigating here. But overall, I did love this book. I gave His and Hers 4 stars. The next award, what would make the best adaptation, goes to The Good Girl's Guide to Murder trilogy, which is fun because this is in the works right now for a TV series by the BBC, and I am pretty excited to watch that. This is the story of Pip, a high school girl that starts the series as the good girl, as the one that's always doing homework and very focused on her studies, and by the end of the series has somewhat been corrupted by those studies because she chooses for her class project to investigate a kind of cold case murder that happened in her town. And along the way, she uncovers lots of little conspiracies and mysteries. I felt a lot of feelings about these books. Number 1 is definitely my favorite. Then I feel like the series goes downhill from there until book 3, feeling more meh about that one. I think one of the reasons for this is that descent of character that I was talking about, where Pip never really becomes like a stronger person. She never overcomes her weaknesses. She just accumulates more intense weaknesses until by the end of the series, like, I was hating for her and rooting for her to fail. So yes, I was still very engaged in this book, but I was engaged on the wrong side cheering for the villains. And I think a lot of that is that Pip's investigation style is so infuriating, where she doesn't go about it in a smart way. She goes about it in like a make everyone angry at me and see who gives me a death threat kind of way. And then she has a suspect. Now let's talk about some things that this book series does really well, and because of that I think would make a great adaptation. One of the things that it does extraordinarily well is having relationships between our protagonist Pip and all of her friends and family and enemies. There's a lot of really strong bonds there and interesting dynamics. One of the most iconic ones is between Pip and her partner in crime, Rafi. All throughout the series, they have such good banter. There's such a good balance between them of different strengths and weaknesses. Another thing that these books excel at, particularly in book 1, is just having really solid mysteries, where it gives you a lot of different clues and red herrings and really leads you different ways, and I think that drama would be particularly good in a TV show environment. Or every episode could have her like chasing down a new lead and having the mystery grow more and more complicated as she uncovers more and more leads. And another thing that the series does really well is mixing in some real suspense and action, where it's not just Pip solving like a 100-year-old cold case. This is Pip solving like a 5-year-old cold case where the murderer maybe is still around in her town, where people are still passionately caring about this case enough to want her to stop investigating it. And I love that pacing balance of like just teenagers hanging out and having fun and investigating and just doing all these little sleuthing tasks and like running for your life and getting death threats, you know. I gave these books on average 3.3 stars. And I've got to go now to go play Dungeons & Dragons, but I will be back to tell you about the rest of these. The next award is the book that should have been half as long. And that gets to go to Winter's Gifts. Now, this book is already like a very short novel, but honestly should have been novella length. This is a spin-off of the Rivers of London series, which is about modern-day detectives in London solving supernatural crimes. This book, Winter's Gifts, is about one of the American counterparts who has shown up in some of the main books. And now here is her own adventure, where there's some spooky stuff happening in America and she's called in to help. And so much of this novel was so boring. Was her just like going from place to place and like talking with people, but not in a way that really felt like it moved the stakes forward or helped me get to know her character. Furthermore, I want this book to be way shorter because it got on my nerves. Like, as an American, this book did not feel like it was written by an American in any stretch of the way. Like, yes, lots of Americans own guns, but it is not American culture to answer your door with a gun, which happens several times in this novel. So one, this book should have been shorter because it was just stretched out too long and boring. And if the plot had been more condensed and really focused, I think it would have been stronger. And two, it should have been shorter just because I didn't like a lot of it. But this book was entertaining enough to get me to happily finish it. So I gave it 3 stars. The award for the book that should have been twice as long gets to go to Centaur and Sensibility. This is a very short novella, like 50 pages, so I would have appreciated like twice as long. The plot is thus. In a world that is like Regency England but with some magical creatures, we have a headstrong young woman who is destined to marry a terrible man, but she doesn't want to. So she runs away. And while she runs away, she gets lost in like this magical forest where, coincidentally, there's also lost a centaur. And they find each other and they spend some time lost in the forest together and they fall in love. And that's the story. I think whenever you're trying to tell a love story this quickly, it honestly ends up feeling kind of cheap. Where sure, these characters had some conversations in the woods and some chemistry, but it's hard to buy them really pledging their lives to each other. And that's why I would have loved this one to be twice as long, to have really a lot more scenes and depth and really getting to know each other kind of exchanges when maybe they were lost in the enchanted splendid forest for like several weeks together. And then I would also love scenes of them getting out of the forest and introducing their love into society and seeing how all of the other characters react to that. But Centaur and Sensibility, it was short, it was sweet, I liked it. But yeah, for me to love this, I think it would have had to be about twice as long. I gave it 3 stars. The award for the book that left my mind the fastest after finishing goes to Dragon. This is yet another installment in the Vlad Taltos series, which I am slowly making my way through and loving some of the books and absolutely despising others. This is the first book that I feel pretty middle of the road about. Like, every individual scene of this book is okay, but the way that they're all stitched together is pretty incoherent. So this is the story about our favorite fantasy mob boss, Vlad, getting himself involved in a magical war. And he's not really like a patriotic person at heart, but he finds himself slowly like learning these kind of attributes and coming to care about the cause of this war over the course of it. Or at least caring more than he did at the beginning of the book. And this story has like a very split timeline where we have the present timeline of him fighting in the war, and we have the past timeline of right before he joined the army and what led up to those events happening. But the problem is that it switches so fast between these two timelines and doesn't really give a chance for either of them to fully develop, so consequently I'm invested in neither of them. Because especially near the beginning of the book, whenever we're involved in the battle plotline, like, I have no reason to care about it. I don't know what the stakes of this battle are. I don't understand why Vlad is fighting here. Things are really boring and monotonous and emotionless in those battles. And then we have the past timeline where more character internal conflict is happening and the stakes are changing and shifting. But after a while, it's clear that that timeline is just going to lead to the war, and so the second half of the past timeline is super boring. And the first half of the present timeline is super boring, so whatever part of the book you're in, you've got a boring timeline you're switching back and forth with, which in the end made me just not care about any of them. Which is further reinforced by the feeling that like the book is the same at the beginning and at the end, which is also kind of part of the blended timelines where it started, where it was ending, but consequently feels like it was a nothing book that is ready to leave my mind in its entirety as soon as I had finished it. I rated Dragon 3 stars. And ending with the award of the most unputdownable book, which gets to go to Things You Save in a Fire. This is another one of those romances, and I loved this one especially because it focused more on a leading women's fiction side of really getting to know our heroine and her emotional troubles and focusing in on that, with a very nice dose of romance as the side plot. Our heroine is a firefighter, and she finds her life upended in such a way where she ends up moving in with her mother, who she has been estranged with for years. She also has to take a new job at a new fire department, which is not very accepting of women. And I love this one as a contrast to the book I just talked about, Dragon, where that book had a lot of battles, had a lot of really high intensity moments that you'd think would be entertaining, but they weren't, because I didn't care about the character going through them and because I didn't understand the emotional context for them. Things You Save in a Fire is much more mellow. There are some firefighting intense moments, but they're definitely the minority, and the main things is just the interpersonal conflicts. But because I viscerally understood how much every single one of these interactions meant to our protagonist, and every single one of the interactions she goes through does mean a lot to the protagonist, I cared deeply. And I couldn't put this book down because I was excited to find out if she would reconcile with her mother and how. I was excited to find out if she would gain the respect of her co-workers. I was so hooked on the plotline of if she would be able to find love and find room in her heart for that love. This book is exquisite. I love how the emotions are so forefront on the page without feeling overly cheesy. I love how every scene really does matter to the internal conflict and character arc of our protagonist. I gave Things You Save in a Fire 4 stars. If you enjoyed this video, the one you'll want to watch next is my thriller and romance vlog, because that has some serious feelings on all of these books.